Caledonian Elixir.
Broadcasting from Glasgow, Scotland, welcome to the Caledonian Elixir. I'm your host Vincent, and you can get involved by clicking on the link beside the video. Once you do that, follow the simple instructions, enter your name, it's easy. Then you can come on the show and share your views. Whether you agree or disagree, it's free. So just click on the link and join the discussion. So I'm an hour behind because there's been some technical madness that has occurred. I had to upload a new intro video and the new intro song I made because the previous one was copyrighted and it got a strike, and therefore my destinations had errors. And I had to go through all that again. So hence why I am delayed. But listen up. This live stream podcast is a deep dive into the human condition, an interzone of information where we can express our views with wit and true grit without the dogmatic narrative of the mainstream media. So whether we're discussing the paranormal like we are today or politics, this is the stark truth about our own experience, often told with a degree of humour or self-delusion. Because, if I'm honest, we exist in a dead-end, run-down frontier of podcasts and information. We hear lies spin and the same slogans repeated over and over by panhandlers serving us up information for our consumption, information that is pretty much useless. But not here, not on the Elixir. So what we're debating today is the subjects of the paranormal. It could be aliens, human psi phenomena, ghosts. And let's face it, there is no wonder at the diversity of stories or experiences we have on these subjects. And don't forget, you can come on and share your stories. Maybe you think you saw an alien, a UFO, or possess powers of remote viewing. If you do, click on that link and come on and tell us about it, because there's nothing like the paranormal that interests us more. And, our forefathers in every culture contain legends about this phenomena, so it is real and it is mind-blowing. Might sound a bit hyperbolic and fascinating, but it is real. And for centuries, we never lose that sense of awe and wonder. So, let's talk about these subjects. Now, is Gareth John?
Yes,
Right,
I'm here.
You're here, right?
Yes.
So I've got a guest on, Gareth John. Now, how are you doing, man?
Not too bad, not too bad. How's yourself?
I am. Well, apart from those technical issues that set me back about an hour there and were a pain in the backside, I'm
Yeah.
doing not bad.
Bloody gremlins, eh? Gremlins on the machine.
Gremlins, yeah.
You know.
Mhm. How's your Easter been?
Quiet, quiet. I've only I'm not overly religious. I have started praying over the last year or so. Just due to conversations that we've had in the past privately, and
Mhm.
it does seem to help. It does seem to help my mental health quite a bit. It does seem to help me sort of, to have that sort of, I wouldn't say blind faith, but like sort of a bit of faith, a wee bit of positivity to sort of, bring yourself, before you go to bed and when you wake up, so that, no matter what happens during the day, other powers still have your back. So
Hmm.
when it comes to Easter, like I kind of fell out of faith when I was about 8 or 9. And I've only just started to sort of rediscover it. I don't go to church or anything, but it's. I mean, when you talk about paranormal, I mean, resurrection, necromancy, I mean, you don't get much more paranormal than that, do you?
Hmm.
So, but
Well,
yeah, it's been quiet.
here's my
Yeah.
position, and after I explain it, I'll essentially ask you to answer this question and get involved, and anyone else who wants to get involved, um, because this is a new startup, and although there is an audience for this show, there isn't going to be a great audience until there is more and more content out there to view and enjoy. And when you have gremlins messing up the operation, it's never good. So
Yeah.
I lean more towards there is an alien intelligence affecting our culture, but I'm also open to the possibility it's some kind of psyop. I mean, look, we've had governments that have been involved in managing public perception as well as cover-ups in respect to UFOs and their more modern acronym UAPs. And it's not just the recent disclosure revealed by congressional committees. We could go back more than 70 years to Roswell, 1947, to when the Roswell Army Airfield released a statement that they recovered a crash flying disc. That was the Roswell Army Airfield that actually released that into the media, but they discovered a crash disc. That was before the US Air Force existed. Then Major Marcel, again, someone in the military, he then came out with a statement pretty much saying the same. Um, and by the way, Roswell at the time was the location of the only atomic bomber wing on the planet. So the location was very sensitive to the US government. It was a location of utmost national security, so to speak, wasn't it? Um,
Yeah.
but we get more examples of government PR. You get the 1950s Robertson panel, Project Blue Book, the Condon Report. But as a result of all this, or in part of it, we get all the film and media representations of aliens, from like films like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the TV series The X-Files, the book Communion, which was a big bestseller, a brilliantly written book as well. So what I'm getting at is our culture is permeated with alien contact stories, UFOs to the point of religiosity. And that's also the view of like seminal big figures in the field, like Jacques Vallée, Diana Pasulka, two of the biggest names in ufology. And if you recall, we've even had UFO cults, New Age eschatological groups such as Heaven's Gate, who believed back in the 90s that a massive spaceship trailed the comet Hale Bob. Now, do you remember that? Do you remember
Yeah.
Hale Bob?
Well, I remember him skating, doing all those guys, with the Adidas and
That's it,
the
yeah.
unit, you know,
Yeah,
and
but for anyone that doesn't know about this, a comet was passing through our solar system in the 1990s, and what Heaven's Gate this cult believed is that if they could purify their bodies and minds, they could evolve into an angelic alien form of life. Now, tragically, this involved the members of the cult taking their lives, viewing the arrival of the comet Hale Bob as a sign. Um, to ascend, to evolve. But to finish my point, when the emergency services arrived, finding the bodies of Heaven's Gate in their mansion in Santa Fe, California, amongst the dead was a portrait of an alien, an image they believed was what they would transform into. It was a representation of an alien. And this image looked identical to like the grey alien depicted in Close Encounters of the X-Files. So culturally, we have accepted this as real, whether contact with alien intelligence is or not. The presence definitely feels real in our culture. So, like, my question to you, man, is: do you think UAPs are a modern myth, or is an actual intelligence interacting with our culture?
Well, I mean, I've seen sort of UFAs when I was younger and stuff. And I mean, but at the same time, was that a UFA or was it like government sort of army, experimental tech? I mean, it's kind of hard to tell. And like when it comes to like actual aliens, it tends to be like if you go back to like the 1920s and stuff, there's like reports of little green men, but now they're grey and they're black bug-eyed, and everyone has that very, very distinct, very, very classic, now classic sort of 80s, 90s, the
Hmm.
grey, which, I mean, if you go back sort of to the 50s, like when it was flying saucers and, sort of post-Roswell, sort of pre-Battle of Los Angeles, it's very, aliens were like all manner of things. Whereas now it seems to be like when you're talking about like cultural consciousness, everyone has that one image, and
Well, we
therefore
had that. We
that
had
is
that
now
airship mystery.
yeah,
Do you remember the airship mystery in the 19th century? And that was like the rage in the culture back then, especially in the United States, where you had the appearance of
yeah.
these airships, and no one could, not even the US government, we could not describe who was piloting these airships. And so it
What
wasn't, but what?
what like Zeppelin type things when you say
Well,
airship?
again, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's one of the reasons why in the 1940s and 50s you had these films featuring um, who was that actor? Vincent Van Price. Vincent Price.
Yeah, Vincent Price. Yeah,
I and the film Masters of the World, and you had
yeah.
Jules Verne stories, and
What
it
a James
was it,
Bond.
yeah, and it permeated the culture back then. The airship mystery, and the U.S. government were set out and trying to, discover what was behind it all. And no one to this day has been able to explain who was piloting the airships in the late 19th century in the United States. And the airships, when you fast forward 40, 50 years, we, we stopped hearing of them. They became flying discs, they became flying
Yeah,
saucers. And then,
yeah.
yeah, and
And like
so,
the food fighters and all that, like the not the band, but the actual pilots. When they were flying about, they saw like what they described as foos based on like a 1940s pulp comic, which were flying saucers. They became the Foo Fighters, which was sort of reported alien unidentified craft in the military, which you
mhm.
still get today with Tic Tac, wee things, and all that sort of stuff. But when you're talking about airships, I just think that's a rich person thing. I'm thinking it's like sort of, maybe it might be some sort of secret society having a wee bit of fun. Just fucking with people. You know, especially back then, it'd be very easy to do. Like let's fire up the Zeppelin, honey, paint it green. Let's fuck with some people. It's a war. Get Austria to do War of the Worlds on the radio. People piss themselves. People shit themselves. It'll be hilarious. Come on, cause mass panic. Like that was a big thing as well. Like the War of the Worlds, it was like
Mm.
it was claimed at the start. It was a dramatization, but most people missed the start, and then there was sort of mass riots because people thought here we are, 1932, the world's dead, the aliens are invaded,
Well, have you
So
have
I
you ever
think
came have you ever came across the term technogenesis?
no, is that like Phil Collins, like updated modern band?
Technogenesis.
just
Well,
using the idea, it can't walk either, it can't dance or dance.
it's like Hadaway meets Genesis, well, like, listen, like seriously, essentially, the idea is that humans evolve with their technology, right? So the reason I was bringing up the 1890s airship mystery, as I said, like there were sightings over and over of these mysterious airships, right? Um, and there were even cases where the pilots did interact with witnesses you know, who experienced this. Uh, but the whole thing, as I said, remains a mystery, lost in time. But you also had the Celtic fairy stories. You know, you had the fairy circles, sort of like the 18th, 17th, and 16th century, that involved
Mm.
strange lights and people being taken and abducted.
Yeah,
And
the wills of the wisp, which I believe
yeah,
are caused by smoke gas, allegedly.
and and to me, it looks like the phenomenon manifests by how advanced we are as a technological society. Or sorry, the way it manifests is determined by how advanced the culture is. So in the past, it has been airships, fairy circles, Ezekiel's chariot described in the Bible. For us in our physical and virtual world, it seems to bleed into each other, it intersects, and we get our 21st century version of technogenesis. Not just as it Phil Collins meets Hadley, but you get orbs and flying saucers and close encounters of the fourth kind, third kind, abductions, implants. You know, it's a whole history dating back thousands of years, and Phil Collins is right in the middle of it.
Yeah. So, like, when you say like Techno Genesis, are you talking like Arthur C. Clarke, 2001: A Space Odyssey, like with the apes and the obelisks, and with the bone, and then the guy transcends into like this extraterrestrial being, and
Well,
like
do you know
that kind
what
of thing?
do you know what Stanley Kubrick said to MGM when 2001: A Space Odyssey was being made? He said that MGM is making the first religious movie, the first science fiction
That's right.
religious movie. They just don't know it yet.
Yeah,
And
that's right. That's
there
correct.
was a yeah, there was something spiritual about 2001: A Space Odyssey. The monolith. People for decades didn't understand what the monolith represented, but the monolith represented the film lens, the camera. It represented evolution and man's sort of eye and mind looking back at him. That's why at the end, when the main character is being absorbed into the monolith, when you see it reflected in his eye, you see a camera looking back.
That's right. Yeah.
Right,
Oh,
and so you also see when he's lying in bed before he becomes a star child, a camera looking at him, and also you see the monolith transform into a television. Well, what's on the television? A lens. So why
and how?
you got to think, why does the monolith transform into a television? Well, it was a metaphor for the camera, for the
Uh,
human eye observing the evolution of information in nature.
yeah,
It was basically a metaphor for what I was describing, technogenesis.
and like HAL 3000, like he is just a lens. He's just an eye
Yeah.
as well.
So
Wow.
you see that symbol, that metaphor of the lens over and over
Right.
and over again. And the idea of the monolith is so abstract, it's so difficult to wrap your head around, especially if you're just this casual observer sitting watching this film and trying not to get too serious
Mhm.
about things. But there is some deep seated, deep embedded, like symbolic matter in that film that it's really deep, man.
Yeah, it is. It's a very deep, very, very profound film. Um, I, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily condone or suggest people do this out there, but if you watch it, if you watched it in, let's just say, some sort of altered states through certain means, it
Mhm.
becomes a very, very profound film. You know,
So it's
so
like that film, Spring, Summer, Autumn, and
yeah,
Winter, that is about this.
yeah, the
Yeah.
reincarnation cycle, and yeah, that's a great film. It's such a spiritual film as well. It's like
Hmm.
I'm forever changed from watching that film in an altered state. Like I see life completely differently. I do strongly recommend it. It's got bugger all to do with what we're talking about today, but certainly check that film out if you get the chance. It's available like on Amazon. That it's not that expensive. It's very very good. It's Korean. Though. It's great.
Yeah.
Great film.
Don't you advertise anything on this channel, mate?
No, I'm not advertising at all. I'm just suggesting. You know,
Suggestion. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of suggestions and psychic phenomena and stuff like that, Vincent here has been learning hypnosis recently, haven't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I have some hypno videos to view and listen um,
Yeah.
on
I,
YouTube.
I, I, did, I did one of them this morning and I feel great. Fantastic. I would recommend them. Um, Also, I can't look at Ace of Spades without seeing Black Dots. Thanks for that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was straight out of George H. Estabrook's manual on how to hypnotize people, and essentially adapted that to embed a suggestion to help people who are listening improve their health, to make decisions that would better their lifestyle, and stay away from things that are harmful. And uh, you need to listen to it repeatedly. You need to reinforce that messaging, because it is like guided meditation with solfeggio frequencies. So
The
it does
vagal
relax you,
frequencies are
and it
brilliant.
does suggest. Sorry.
So vagal frequencies are brilliant. I've been doing them for about 2 years, and they've greatly improved my health, my mental health particularly. I strongly recommend them.
Well, I mean, there is an overlap there when it comes to hypnosis and the psyche and the paranormal again. I mean, so
Mm.
take Carl Jung. He introduces us to the term synchronicity, right? Which is some timeness in a way. Same timeness, yeah. It's like a casual relationship between two events, physical or psychic. And one good example is actually from Jung's life. So Jung had this patient, right? And this patient had a dream of being offered a valuable piece of jewelry. And this jewelry was designed as a golden scarab. Now, symbolically, this beetle to the Egyptians symbolizes rebirth. Now, whilst this
Oh,
patient was explaining this, conveying this dream to Jung, a scarab beetle appeared on the window behind him. So Jung
wow.
goes over to the scarab beetle on the window and he says, "This is your dream." And I think the essence, the meat of this idea is that events are coordinated experiences and powers that are residing in our collective consciousness, often manifest in our reality without like a cause and effect relationship. It almost defies causality. And that is what synchronicity is, and it is almost paranormal as far as we can understand it.
Yeah. I've experienced synchronicities all the time these days. And at first, it takes a bit getting used to, 'cause it does seem very, very weird and freaky and whatnot. But once you sort of recognize it and you sort of pick up the patterns and you sort of accept it, it's really, really cool. Like I keep seeing like double numbers all the time, and like I'll see someone or I'll be thinking about someone and I'll bump into them, and it's just weird stuff like that. You know,
And then it's not just synchronicity, but and I think all of us experience it to one degree or another. Like when we're thinking of someone and then they call us on the phone and we're like, "Shit, I was just thinking of you." And or we bump into someone in the street and we maybe had a dream about them or something like that the night before. So everyone sort of dealt with that to one degree or another. But there's other like psi phenomena that overlaps like in the sense of paranormal, because you get like the ancient religious wisdom, right? Like texts such as the Astavakra Gita, um, and sort of biocentric consciousness models of reality. And so most of us are aware of the ideas of quantum physics, that consciousness is at least that we're at least a co-creator of a universe, and that is kind of like the basis for like non-dual reality and of Hindu texts like the Astavakra Gita. Um, And this theory is supported by physics, quantum physics at least.
Mm,
You had the double slit experiment that revealed um, light waves or particles are just possibilities or probabilities until there is a conscious observer. So, like, you get physicists that theorize that there is an omnipresent consciousness in the universe, and
mm,
parallels to this idea, these theories can be found thousands of years ago in the Indian Veda. And I'll give you an example from what I can remember, like of the Astavakra Gita, where it's there's something like it says something like, "Oh, duality is the root of misery. There is no other remedy for it except the realization that all objects of experience are false, and that I am one and pure intelligence and bliss." So it's that idea again that there is a collective consciousness that
mm.
is of oneself, and that oneself manifests reality, and there is no true like separation between you and the universe. It's like it's all one.
Wow.
And that's kind of paranormal in itself because we are so
Yeah,
grounded to the idea that we are individuals and we are all separate, and we
yeah,
have our own egos, and we basically conduct ourselves in society based on the norms and values that have been instilled in us by society, and that has in part constructed our egos. But the emphasis of collective consciousness and on human ability to map reality is so difficult to really wrap our heads around. And that's why
mm,
you have so many branches of psychology that attempt to explain it.
right.
Because there is no real consensus on what reality is and how our mind is sort of causing it.
Yeah, and like I mean, like memory is so malleable as well. So like when it comes to consciousness and stuff like that, because anyone can just go like you'll remember you person might remember something some one way, and a person that's with you could remember it completely different because they've seen it through a completely different lens. But the same thing has happened to both of you at that time. It's just your individual perception.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, that's partly why eyewitness testimony isn't
It's not reliable. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, in court, we need more than eyewitness testimony to
Yeah.
convict someone because it's not reliable. Memory is not reliable. Memory,
Mm-mm.
as you said, is very malleable, and you often construct your past, your memories based on how you feel in the present. And that's partly due to trauma too. You find that with people who are
Yeah.
experiencing deep-seated trauma that has occurred in their past. They have difficulty in confronting that trauma, so they often create screen memories and reconstruct memories, and it's hard going.
Yeah, like safety nets, like little mental safety nets that block it, or they just completely like erase that memory. You just bury it completely, and then you just repress it, and then it comes out in other ways, and usually triggered by other traumas, or yeah,
And that is a big thing in term also when it relates to the abduction experience, because are these
yes,
people truly being abducted, or are they contending with memories that are actually screen memories?
yeah. A lot of people think that they're not actually being abducted; they've just sort of repressed our memories of like abuse or whatever. And it got me thinking, right, about like so if say that people have been like abducted, not necessarily by extraterrestrials, but by sinister people, and then they're hypnotized and they're abused.
Mm.
Right now, if you remember, like the Devil's Den incident, I was watching a wee bit of that, and he was talking about like the lady with the wig at the foot of his bed, right? Now, if you remember, like with Bob Lazar, he said that he'd seen the U.S. Army experiment on like children with certain disabilities. You know, like Down syndrome kids and stuff, or was it the Russians that did that? But if you take that and you take like the poisoned mercury milk that the CIA used to give babies, that would make them their skin sort of more less vibrant, shall we say? You know, so and if they're drugging them with LSD that dilates their pupils, do you think that could explain grays that they're just actually experimental children?
You
Or
know,
am I
I
just
remember,
am
I
I
remember.
just being like indulging and stuff?
No, no, I remember that, and I did make an episode on this in my podcast years ago.
Yeah.
That there was an idea, theory that the
I do have a
Roswell
wee bit of
incident.
audio issues on my end as well. I'm sorry, I can barely hear you.
Right, 1 second. Um, am I am I clearer now?
No. Someone was phoning me though, so I don't know. And since then, it's been a bit odd. So I don't know if it's maybe been that, and they've just
Right,
sort of
I'll continue speaking, and
just continue.
hopefully.
I can't hear you. It's just really faint.
Okay. Well, I do remember there was that theory that in 1947, the crash, it wasn't an actual disc with aliens on board. They were children who were part of US government radiation experiments. And you were
No,
correct that the US government had operations in the past where they did give pregnant mothers milk that
there's nothing in it.
essentially was poisoned. There was radiation and stuff through it. Um, so, and you had in the 1990s also the congressional committees on radiation experiments. I think it was President Bill Clinton who signed off on that committee, and you had testimonies from people like Valerie Wolf and dozens of other persons who testified to this committee of senators, congressmen, that they were experimented on. It was human radiation experiments. It was deprivation chamber experiments,
Yeah,
hallucinogenic drugs, and that often there were satanic there was satanic ritual abuse
yeah,
involved, and that these victims they experienced what they felt were hallucinations of demons and aliens. But in
mm,
reality, it was the result of deprivation chambers, Skinner boxes, and hallucinogenic drugs and hypnosis. And
that sounds like a good weekend actually. Same
I
here.
mean, I don't know. I mean,
I mean, free drugs, isolation, to have to deal with people. Hell yeah, you know. And I bet you like party with aliens and demons and stuff. Like that's a party, man. That sounds like my kind of Friday night. You know, like
I mean, it does sound
especially
like
back in my 20s. Like hell yeah,
it's
you know.
yeah, it sounds like your kind of Friday night. But like, take the one alien
And
abduction case.
of course, Clinton. If Clinton's involved, you know there's going to be some good sex, man. I mean, that head is going to be amazing, man. Yeah. I mean, obviously his wife will kill you in a couple of years, but I mean, allegedly. But I mean, that sounds like a great time, man. You know,
Mm.
like, you know, what are Skinner boxes?
Skinner boxes are usually confined experiments for it is like a box, and it's an experiment where he originally used rats, and he would use something called classical and operant conditioning to control the behavior of the rats. Eventually, he started putting human beings in this machine, this box, and he
Mm,
actually used his daughter too, and his daughter actually killed herself later on in life. Is I'm not saying as a result of it, but she developed deep-seated psychological issues that a lot of people have theorized were the result of her father experimenting on her. But a Skinner box, a lot, basically, it's a box where you would be conditioned and you would have your behavior controlled by a scientist, and it was
So
usually
like
very children and young people who were used in these experiments.
so like a sort of Pavlov dogs type of situation, but like in a confined space.
Yeah, it was a contrivance that usually involved a confined space, often dark confinement,
Oh,
involving
that doesn't
noise.
sound just you're taking all the fun out of my perfect weekend things.
Mate, listen, blame Skinner. Skinner! Right,
That
but
gets some steam
Gareth,
hands. Yeah,
Gareth, the one alien abduction case, right, that really freaked me out, especially when I was a kid, is Whitley
mhm,
Strieber's abduction, right? And there's a reason
yeah.
I'm bringing up him now, right? So listen to this, right? I'll just give you a short description for members of the audience who are not familiar with Stryber. On December 26, 1985, that's right, the day after Christmas, in Stryber's secluded cabin in upstate New York, right? When Whitley Strieber and his family were asleep, a light appeared that enveloped the cabin they were staying at and sleeping at. And Whitley awoke to find what he called visitors. And
Like South Park.
yeah, that's where they got that,
Is that the guy
term
that
from.
wrote? Is this the guy that wrote A Scanner Darkly?
No, that's Philip K. Dick. That's
Oh, right.
right. And that's a good book. The
Yeah,
film was bad,
yeah.
right? But anyway, so that the visitors that appeared in his cabin in the middle of the night did not look human. And they took him out of the cabin and he felt paralyzed. And they took him to a strange, smelly, circular room. And he said he was surrounded by these visitors, but he couldn't really focus on them as he was terrified. Every time he
Mm,
looked at them, his terror increased because they just looked so
mm,
ugly. They were not human, and it's the first time he could recall consciously ever encountering them. So every time he looked at these things, his vision went all blurry. He was freaked out,
I've had one night
and
stands like that as well.
yeah, haven't we all? But when he did look at them, he described them as being small with these coveralls on. And then there were the grey, willowy type with large, inky black eyes, the ones that we're all familiar with from like shows like the X Files or Close Encounters.
Yeah.
And he said that they performed some kind of experiment on him. And then he lost consciousness, waking up in the cabin the next morning, thinking he saw an owl in his bedroom. And that's an example of a screen memory. You have owls that who have large eyes and they've got large kind of awkward shaped
Is that why
heads.
the owl's the logo for the podcast, or is that just a coincidence?
That it's a synchronicity, mate. It's paranormal.
Yeah. Well, there we go.
That's
Yeah,
an exact example of what we're talking about here: coincidence and
yeah,
synchronicity.
that is amazing. That's
Right, right. Now, however, right, this case gets more interesting because after this happened, he could recall parts of what took place, but his memories were not clear. He could consciously remember parts of what happened to him, but he was
like
confused.
like flashes and stuff like that. Just wee
He,
snippets of what
well,
happened. Not
some of it he does describe some of it being like flashbacks, but he also does describe like sitting down and consciously thinking back to the events of the 26th, and he can remember. He can recall much of what happened. It wasn't like he was getting like an acid flashback and he was like, whoa. No, he could think back to the events of that night, but it confused the hell out of him because let's be honest. If you're thinking back to some night and you
yeah,
recall being taken out of your bedroom by these non-human entities, that makes no sense to you. So you obviously
yeah,
think, right, that isn't that didn't happen. So he
yeah,
eventually went on to meet a guy called Bud Hopkins, who suggested that Whitley be hypnotized, to improve
yeah,
his memories of being abducted.
yeah,
Well, under hypnosis, it turned out right that Whitley had memories of being abducted, dating back to his childhood, and So he goes on to write about these experiences in a book called Communion that was later
Mm.
adapted into a film starring Christopher Walken. And by the way,
Brilliant
that's
film.
an awesome film, but Christopher
Yeah.
Walken is nothing like Whitley Strieber. Christopher Walken,
Mm.
right, this is just a wee side note. Christopher Walken, in every film he stars in, plays Christopher Walken.
Yes. Yeah.
He is always
Yeah, whereas Sleepy Hollow, well, Sleepy Hollow he doesn't really talk, but like
yeah,
whereas Batman Returns or Communion or Pulp Fiction, he's Christopher Walken in every single one.
that's right. And I saw that film as a kid and it freaked me out, right? But listen, that
Mm.
takes me right to what I was talking about, right? Because the one thing you have to know about Whitley Strieber is that he claimed, like during in 1989, that a man and a woman essentially also entered the same cabin that he was staying in,
Uh-huh.
and they overpowered him and inserted an object into his ear, at the pinna of his ear, right? And he
Oh.
later would hear noises that he felt was caused by this object, this implant.
Yeah.
And he then went on to meet a man, a doctor called Roger Lear in the early 90s, who performed a scan and they did discover an implant in
Oh.
his ear. Now, Whitley's implant was also encased in a like a capsule made from an epidermis, which is very interesting, right? But if I remember
Epidermis, as in like
correctly,
here.
basically there was like organic matter growing around the
The implant.
object. Yeah.
Oh.
Now,
Yeah.
if I remember correctly, Whitley concluded in his book written in a New World, right, that his implant he didn't think was the result of aliens, right?
Oh.
He felt that it was human beings who inserted that into his body. Now,
Mm.
Roger Lear, the same doctor who performed these tests and was also involved in extracting implants.
Right.
Now, Roger Lear sh- showed Whitley certain implants that had been emitting low level FM radio signals.
Uh-huh.
Now, this technology has existed since the early 1960s when the neuroscientist Dr. Jose Delgado invented something called the stimul receiver. Now, the stimul receiver is an electrode capable of transmitting and receiving FM radio waves. And we also
Mm.
know that the CIA worked with implants for the purpose of biotelemetry. So we
Mm.
have here examples of people who say that they are abducted by aliens, right?
Mm.
And have objects implanted in them. But
Yeah.
at the same time,
The CIA
these
were working on that
objects
technology.
these objects are emitting FM radio frequencies. So why would aliens, for example, implant an object in you that emits an FM radio frequency?
Yeah, that doesn't make sense. Is that why like people go at the fillings in my teeth or tuning into Radio 4 and that kind of stuff?
Well,
Like
but
when
Jo-
you
but
sort of,
Jose Delgado invented this technology in the 50s and 60s. It is a real technology, but these implants can transmit and receive FM radio frequencies. And
why
one
FM and
doc
not AM like
well
that?
one documented case, right, is a guy called Robert Naslund, and he was Swedish, and he claims he was implanted in the late 60s, and
Uh,
I believe it was in Europe. Anyway, for a while he was unaware anything happened. Then he began experiencing altered memory and behavior function, and he too was
mm,
given an X-ray, and that X-ray revealed a foreign object at the base of his skull. Now, Peter
mm,
Lindstorm, who was a professor at the University of California, he supported Naslund, uh, basically in order to have more examinations done by radiologists, for example, who also corroborated that foreign objects were in his nasal passages adjoined to the brain. And Lindstorm theorized that these implants were used for radiohypnotic intracranial control and dissolution of memory. Essentially,
oh,
these implants could induce hypnotic trances, delivering suggestions right into the person's mind.
That's freaky. That's
So,
weird.
so remember what we were speaking of earlier in terms of hypnosis and George H. Estabrook's
Yeah.
using Victrola records. So you didn't even need to be sitting beside someone to hypnotize someone.
Mhm.
You could have a Victrola record back in the 40s, or you could nowadays have a file that's playing on YouTube, a
Mhm.
hypnosis file, and that could induce a hypnotic trance. Well, you can have implants that emit FM radio frequencies, audio frequencies that have embedded in them suggestions that would induce um, hypnotic states, thereby creating personality shifts. And if that
Mm.
was to occur so often, it could induce a form of multiple personality disorder.
Right.
And this is the sort of stuff George H. Estabrook's back in the 1940s would talk about. If you hypnotized individuals enough times, um,
Mhm.
you could induce a form of dissonant identity disorder.
Right.
And
So
so if
like,
someone, sorry,
so when we were mucking about a few weeks ago and you were hypnotizing us and like you did that whole thing with like my primary school life and like my normal life and you created a different personality called Bob to deal with like some of the traumas that I dealt with in my school days. And you're like, that's creating a distant personality, a completely different person. Is that what you're talking about here? Like sort of splitting
no,
people in two,
not
essentially?
exactly. However, that practice, that technique is used in a way to schism the mind so that you can confront trauma and deal with it in a way that isn't going to upset you. But it can be used for, you know,
More
people
nefarious
who
means.
have, malicious intent.
Yeah.
And if it is used enough times, it can cause the beginnings of a dissonant identity disorder.
So like Manchurian candidate type of deal,
Yeah,
like
and that's what I'm talking about. I mean, we're all familiar um, with the case of the guy who assassinated
Robert
John Lennon.
Kennedy.
No,
Oh,
John
John
Lennon,
Lennon. Yeah, yeah. Chapman.
and how he was almost vacant
Mm.
reading that
Catcher
that
in the
book.
Rye. Catcher in the Rye.
Exactly. And there are so many people who believe that this was an example of a Manchurian candidate, someone who was
Mm.
hypnotized and who had no recollection of what took place.
Mm.
You have Sirhan, who was involved in the assassination of Kennedy. Him too. He
Mm.
had no recollection of the
Right.
assassination taking place. You have Jolly West, who was involved, who was personally
Jack Ruby.
involved, yeah, and Jack Rubenstein's doctor, and he took over being Jack Ruby's doctor. And within a couple of sessions, Jack Ruby becomes completely delusional, believing that there was a Holocaust taking place outside um,
Mm.
in society, and he was considered insane. And as you
Yeah.
know, Jolly West was involved in the MK Ultra program,
Yeah. And
but
he was connected to the Manson family. He was connected to the Unabomber, Kaczynski, as well.
mhm.
He pops up in a lot of these sort of weird murderous cases. It always seems to be related to murder, like it's a fetish or something. It's weird.
but again, so when we're discussing the phenomenon of alien implants or implants that have been used by the CIA, that technology does exist, and it is causing cognitive and behavioral changes in the person's implanted. I mean, again, you have radio hypnotic cerebral control and dissolution of memory, and people believe that this is used for the purpose of destroying memory. So, for example, if you were abducted and you were experimented on,
Mm.
and you had an implant in your brain, this implant could impair your memory function, thereby
Erasing
preventing
the
you
memory of
from
the event.
discussing that and telling your friends and telling your family what occurred. And this
Yeah.
technology exists, it has existed for decades. and that's why it is an FM frequency, because FM frequencies, that band can travel farther.
Right, of course, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. Yeah, it's a
Now,
stronger, longer.
yeah, so if Josie Delgado was capable in the 60s of using the stimul receiver
Mm,
on human beings, if they are other organizations nowadays doing the same, or they are extraterrestrials abducting people, as
mm,
far-fetched as that sounds to certain people, but there are, cases of abductions, and
mm.
there are people like Roger Lear have extracted these implants that do have, that are quite anomalous. They have they have isotopes that
Mm.
don't correspond to that of this planet.
Well, well, talking about abductions, I did actually look up an interesting statistic about alien abductions in the UK, and that is that 40,000 people since 2000 believe they were abducted. That's a lot of people for it to be just, you know, sort of random or not actually happening. That's quite a damning statistic. Do you not think, Vince?
Well, you have
40,000 in the last 25 years
yeah. I mean, when you
on
have
a small island like Britain.
you have like you have the Condon Report, Project Blue Book. You have several government attempts at PR, um,
Mm,
looking at this stuff, and so the government has sort of verified, corroborated that something has taken place.
mm,
You have a recent disclosure that has revealed that we have something called biologics that are
mm.
operating, UFOs, UAPs, and
Uh,
well, what is that?
I mean, drone
I mean,
technology, this
what I'm
one.
trying to say is, Gareth, what is a biologic? When you have these U.S. congressional committees with senators and
Mm,
congressmen and women, and they are asking questions, of scientists who apparently worked at crash retrievals,
mm,
and you have people like Colonel Corso, who claims that fiber optic technology was derived from retrieved, you know, crashes,
crap. Mm.
craft. So again,
Um, yeah, I don't know.
I mean, the government is involved. They are embedded in this in more than
Yeah.
one way, because you get like psi phenomena, right?
Mm,
And just in case you get like listeners who aren't aware of what psi phenomena is, psi phenomena is psychic abilities that covers remote viewing, precognition, psychokinesis, clairvoyant, right? And again,
mm,
this is real, and the government is involved in this, because you have,
mm,
like, in 1973, the CIA embarked on its first psi ESP experiments with
mm,
Stanford Research Institute, and that was titled Project Stargate. And the USSR even corroborated or collaborated with the US government scientists
mm,
on the transformation project. And here's an interesting nugget, right? It was the chief MK Ultra scientist, Sidney Gottlieb, in the 1970s that awarded Hal Puthoff his first psi research contract that went on to become Stargate. And then you
yeah,
fast forward a few years in the 1980s, that out of Fort Meade, there was a psychic unit ran by Army Intelligence where the famous remote viewer Joe McGonigal operated out of. Um, so when it comes to, as I said, UFOs, aliens, psi phenomena, the government is deeply embedded in it all.
yeah. Well, I
And
mean, why do you think that is? Why do you think the governments want to like be that involved in people's minds? I ask for no particular reason and not sarcastically at all.
I mean, well, take the emphasis you have on, we were referencing earlier, on consciousness, right? And I was
Mm,
discussing with you collective consciousness,
mm,
a Jungian interpretation of collective consciousness, and the human ability of sort of understanding, mapping reality. right? Now, think about this, right? Imagine you've got a form of human interpretation and understanding of reality based on association and not of time, right?
Mm,
Because of paper writing, right, in the printed press, we sort of retrieve and record information largely indexed by time, right?
mm,
But however, now due to computers, we now retrieve information about the past immediately, not indexed by time, but rather by association. So if you go into Google, right, or YouTube and type the word aliens, you receive
oh,
information associated with your search. You
yeah.
don't receive your information associated or sorry determined or indexed by time, but by your search, regardless of time. So
Mm,
this is removing time as a measure of awareness. And as we use paper less and less and computers more and more, our mapping of reality becomes algorithmic and associative.
uh-huh.
So when you have governments involved in managing public perception and public relations,
Uh-huh.
they're essentially trying to map human society and human interaction because, you know, apparently they're elected. Uh, they're trying to
Yeah.
keep everything running. So if there is alien contact and they need to manage public relations in terms of disclosure, they
Mm,
need to be at the centre of that.
right.
But if they are not in control of disclosure, if there is actually a higher intelligence that has power over the situation and the military and government do not, then they are at mercy.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I mean that sounds quite scary actually. If like you know the illusion of people being in control and they're not even in control of situations like that because how can they be? You know, if it's that powerful, how can they fight it? You know.
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, it's true that our forefathers in every culture contain legends about this phenomena.
Yeah.
And it's mind blowing how pervasive it is. And some people make parallels with the stories in the Bible, like Ezekiel's wheel, the chariot,
Oh,
and again the fairy lore and the airships
mm,
and the discs that the Foo Fighters and stuff in the 30s, 40s, and
yeah.
50s. And it is now a mythos that is part of our collective psyche. Because if I was to ask you, can you imagine what an alien looks like? You're
Yeah.
probably like going to think of something like a grey.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Like if you ask most people to draw an alien, that's more than likely what they will draw. You know, and maybe a xenomorph,
Yeah,
but
I was thinking
yeah,
of Sigourney Weaver
yeah, she's
and
hot,
her
man.
contact experience.
Yeah,
Uh, you know, I, it's a good film. The
yeah,
first two, anyway. And again, when you get groups like Heaven's Gate, mate,
yeah,
I mean, that is when it goes wrong. When you
yeah,
get Marshall Applewhite, who advocate an idea to his followers that they will transform into an angelic alien form of life, um, and that angelic form of life is identical to a grey.
agree. Yeah,
So that's an example of that archetype, the archetype of the grey permeating into the collective psyche and
yeah,
almost usurping the logic and control that a person is supposed to have over their own mind and emotional state.
yeah. And considering, especially now, like you don't see greys as much on TV and stuff. You know, like Doctor Who is like Daleks and Cybermen and stuff like that. Stranger Things has got that weird monster thing that's kind of like a sort of Lovecraftian xenomorph, for want of a better term. And like with that, like those are very very popular in our culture, and yet if you were to ask the man in the street, draw me an alien, what are they going to draw? They're going to draw a grey,
Yeah.
which is insane. And like, if you go, draw me another alien that's not a grey, they'll probably draw something from a sci-fi show, even more so than a film like Predator or Aliens, or they'll probably draw you know like a guy with wee antennae, colour him green, like the wee guy for the Flintstones, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Wait, when did aliens stop losing their antennae? That's what I want to know. Because when I was a kid, everyone pretended to be an alien had like a headband with
The
wee
60s.
antennae.
I
Yeah,
remember. I remember Twilight Zone, the old black and white
yeah,
episodes, and we had the antennae back then.
yeah. Like, and like when Bart is the thing from Uranus, he has, antennae, and yet Bart would probably draw a grey, because he's a 90s kid,
And
I always find that kind of weird that, like, you know, growing up, it was dressing up as alien, you had antennae, and now it's just, it's just a grey or a green grey, you know. Did your cousin not prank you, like, pretend to be a grey or something one time?
no, I did it to him. I
Oh,
had
you did it, him, that's right.
mhm.
It's,
And that really freaked him out.
yeah, I mean that's a perfect example of just how, like, permanent our culture is, and how, like, because, like, you managed to terrify your cousin with with like a doll or a mask,
Well, do you
and
know what David Bowie said?
yeah,
David Bowie said the internet is an alien life form.
yeah, wow, that's a,
The internet, if you think about it, is kind of like its own intelligence, especially when you have
yeah,
artificial intelligence that
mm,
is now operating as a part of it.
yeah. Apparently, you can have sex with those. Like, there's a sexy mode, and it just, like, does, like, phone sex, but it learns your kinks and stuff. So,
uh,
like, I was watching a show, and there was a viewer letter, and the guy was driving, and he he deliberately, curiously hit sexy mode on an AI, and it just started, like, faking orgasms and stuff on his way to work. He's like, and it felt like he was cheating on his wife. It was that sort of real, like,
mm.
that connection that he was. It felt like he was having sex with a robot, essentially, which, this entity doesn't physically exist. And, like, with, like, things that don't physically exist, like ghosts, do you think ghosts and aliens are, like, connected in some way?
Well, I don't
Other than,
know.
like, they're paranormal, they're not normal, no. You know what I mean? You know what I mean?
I think. I mean, I remember reading A New World by Whitley Strayhorn. He advocated that the Greys were really disembodied, that their consciousness could come and go from the
Mm,
actual form of the Grey. Like they
yeah,
essentially were not the Grey. If you killed one, its consciousness would leave that body, but it still existed and it could haunt you. So he refers to a case where this guy wanted to like summon the Greys into his life, and so he
uh,
starts using this laser, and he starts like a laser pen, and he goes to
uh,
this airfield and he starts firing this laser pen up at the sky, until one day a UFO appears, and he fires the laser pen at the UFO, so the UFO
uh,
just comes rushing at him, and
uh,
he falls on his ass, and he's like, "Whoa!" He's really kind of taken aback by the fact this UFO's appeared and
uh,
almost collided with him, and it's what occurs like weeks later is the Greys start appearing in his bedroom late at night,
oh,
and this freaks the hell out of him, right?
uh,
And he gets so frightened at the prospect that they may appear in his
uh,
bedroom while he's trying to go to sleep. He goes to bed with a gun, with a like a pistol,
wow,
until one
yeah,
day until one night the Grey appears at the end of his bed and he shoots it.
uh,
But
uh,
the Grey, after it's killed, keeps on coming back, but it haunts
uh,
him.
uh. Oh.
So it gets to the point the guy becomes very mentally sick and physically sick.
Uh,
His health declines and he dies. And so the moral of the story, Whitley argues, is that don't take these things on
uh,
because many hauntings are caused by the fact that they are
you kill.
disembodied entities that can come
Uh,
and go from physical corporeal bodies.
uh,
You know,
uh,
this phenomenon has like a technological basis, but the
mm,
technological basis is tied to our corporeal bodies. Like our bodies are a form of technology to these entities,
mm,
and
yeah.
so they can haunt us from beyond the grave.
Oh, oh, I don't like the sound of that at all. Did you see that thing, the CIA thing they declassified about the Russian and Russian soldiers and like, a UFO and aliens in the 90s with the obelisks? Basically, these Russian soldiers saw a UFO allegedly, shot it down, and three greys came out, shot a ray at them, paralyzed three of them, and then the greys merged into one being, and zapped these soldiers again, and they basically turned into stone. And that's the story where, according to the Russians, to the CIA, in like 89, 1990. And like, that's kind of freaky that if they can merge and become a destructive weapon like that, that actually leaves essentially no evidence because like
Mhm.
stone is part of you know it's part of our terrestrial makeup, so it's just a pile of stones somewhere. You know, does that mean that there were people that were turned to him by an extraterrestrial weapon? More than likely not. There's loads of stones everywhere. But if you imagine that every stone now on, every stone you see could have been a person that was killed by aliens. That's going to be a fun day for you if you go anywhere near gravel.
You're at the beach and you're picking up pebbles. You're trying to skim the pebbles on the
You're
water,
like, oh, I'm
and
trying
it's
to
like, hey,
dead people.
that was my cousin like a week ago, mate.
You're still like instead of an urn, you've just got an hourglass of sand.
Well,
You
people
just
do
turn,
that. Do they not
yeah,
transform remains into like?
diamonds and stuff like that. Yeah.
Aye, yeah.
Mm. Yeah, so like the kid, with enough heat or enough pressure, you could turn a human into a diamond could be mostly carbon. That's all.
By the
That's
way,
all.
I just want to interrupt by saying there may be people that are tuning in and wondering why there is no visual feed to this. Well, there are several reasons for that. One is that the camera on this device isn't up to my standard, and I only like to have visuals on if there is more than one guest. Otherwise, you're just going to see my ugly mug, and
Mm.
you know. So
It's not that
that's the
awkward,
reason.
Vince.
Well, it could be better. Could be better.
Yeah. It could,
Especially
it
like,
could be, it could be longer, grayer. The eyes could be darker.
uh, right. So I'm going to take a break for now and play some music, and we'll be back in a few minutes. So I'm going to play a little bit of Nine Inch Nails Sanctified. So enjoy,
That's
people.
very, very apt since it's Easter, Vince. 9 Jesus.
It's still getting worse after everything I've tried. What if I found a way to wash it all aside?
Yeah, I'm ready.
her spells. Well, she's turning me into someone else. Every day I hope and pray that this will end. But when I can, I do it all again. And if she says come inside, I'll come inside for her. And if she says give it out, I'll give everything to.
Broadcasting from Glasgow, Scotland, this is the Caledonian Elixir. Right, you still there, Gav?
Yes, I'm still here.
Good, good. Well, again, I know there was some technical issues at the start. I know, and I blame this streaming app I'm using. I don't know if I'm going to continue to use it or use something else because there was no explanation for that. There was no need for that. And it's completely unprofessional in appearance.
Yeah, yeah, it's unfortunate, but some of the issues that we had and having. Uh,
But, Gareth, John, I
overall,
want to tell you something that the Red Hot Chili Peppers said, right?
huh?
They said space might be the final frontier, but it's made in a Hollywood basement. So,
Uh,
with that being said, do you think we really went to the moon?
well, apparently they've left like metal objects up there, but so they can shine lasers on it and signal the laser bounces back, and that's supposedly proof. But I'm kind of skeptical, you know.
Like, do you
Um,
believe we went to the moon and decided to play golf? And like, there's something. What if,
yeah,
like we went to the moon? Why haven't we returned?
yeah. I mean, we have, but we've just never landed again, which is even more strange, you know.
Well, you have the Saturn V rocket, and they say
Uh,
the Saturn V rocket was essentially the rocket that took us to the moon, and
yeah,
this was 50, 60 years ago. Now, are you telling me that the Saturn V rocket is superior to the SpaceX Falcon rocket? Why
not
is
in
it
any
that
way.
why is it that Elon Musk said we would have to refuel several times to get to the moon?
Yeah,
So is it that the Saturn V rocket was capable of a greater payload of fuel?
possibly.
Well, then why is it that 50, 60 years later we're not using rockets that
Yeah, that
likewise could?
technology. Yeah, that's yeah.
And we know and wait a minute, we know that there are rockets that are capable of that because we've been to Mars. We've landed
Yeah,
rovers on Mars.
yeah. Mars is the only planet in our solar system that's solely populated by robots, and that's solely because we put them there.
Exactly. Cylons, mate.
I mean, I'll be honest though, when it comes to planets, I can't wait to visit Uranus. Not Uranus, Uranus.
Right, mate. That's terrible. A joke, you know.
Oh,
But
come on. Every Uranus joke's a good joke.
I'm skeptical that we have been to the moon. I've for most of my life, I have believed that um we got there, or the Americans did. But
Mm.
I don't know, man. I've just kind of thought to myself, when the Wright brothers invented the first aircraft, or when we got the first
Mm.
smartphone, we have
Well,
seen how
well,
technology
technically, Da
technology
Vinci.
has advanced. Why is it that our rockets haven't been able, in the space of
Yeah,
50, 60 years, to travel farther than what they were
yeah.
in the
And
60s?
like even like Leonardo da Vinci, he had designs for flying machines and parachutes and stuff like that, and machine guns and all sorts of things. And they do think he had some sort of future sight. They thought he was like a seer. Like
Right.
Nostradamus, like he had some sort of psychic clairvoyant ability. and that's how you could design things that looked so similar to technologies that would be developed hundreds of years later, like the aeroplane, like the zeppelin, like the helicopter, like the parachute. And so, if he could design something like that, like over 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and then you've got like all these sort of secret, shadowy government agencies that have infinite cash,
hmm
then why not? Why not? Why haven't we invented something even better than the rocket? I mean, or the space shuttle, which they had to retire, which was a bit weird is in and of itself because it was so efficient with its speed.
Gavtron, are you aware that Michael is a Russian bot?
Yes, yes,
Because
and
apparently it
quite a
says
fine
so on
one
the
he is
screen.
too. You know, but he wondered if bot stood for bottom, and in that case, he's a top.
He's a good guy.
Ah, he's all right. He's a good.
He's all
Ah,
right.
he's a good.
Right, do you know what? I'm going to wrap this up because this has been an episode that is a example of a podcast or a live stream
Yeah,
that should not
it's
be
very.
done.
This is Spinal Tap. This is our Spinal Tap moment, people. Hopefully, moving forward, we shall evolve into more Metallica, less Spinal Tap, and
Yeah,
in between will
definitely.
be Muppet.
I'm going to consider seriously going to consider using a different studio because this is just not how it's done. And those
Yeah,
technical
it's
issues
quite
at the start
frustrating.
have really upset me.
Yeah, yeah, you're very upset. But we managed to plug through and muster on, and at the very least, we'll put an episode out there. And I think it's
Yeah.
been very, very informative and quite humorous, just like we set out to do.
Right. Well, have you got any closing statements?
Well, thank you for having me. Happy Easter or whatever pagan
Pete?
heathen stuff you celebrate. Happy Passover. And like, and above all else, I bring you love and live long and prosper.
Okay. Well,
And thank you for having me. I think I said that. Live long and prosper. Go in peace.
take it easy.